The morning of November 2nd, 1944 broke humid and heavy over the limestone ridges of Peleliu. Lieutenant Colonel Kunio Nakagawa stood at the entrance of his command post deep within the Umurbrogol Mountains, watching through field glasses as something extraordinary unfolded on the airfield below. An American Caterpillar D8 Bulldozer, olive drab paint dulled by coral dust, was systematically erasing 3 weeks of his regiment's defensive preparations. The machine had been working for 90 minutes. In that time, the single operator had moved what Nakagawa calculated to be approximately 40 tons of coral, earth, and rubble, filling bomb craters his engineers had created during the American landing, smoothing runway surfaces his artillery had deliberately damaged, and clearing obstacles his construction battalions had spent 6 days positioning. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Nakagawa had commanded the 14th Infantry Division's engineering operations on Peleliu since April. He understood construction. Before the war, he had supervised civilian projects in Manchuria, managing labor crews that built roads, bridges, and fortifications across northern China. He knew precisely how much earth a trained worker could move in an 8-hour shift using hand tools. The mathematics were absolute. One man with a shovel, working under good conditions, could move approximately 200 kilograms of material per hour. That was 1,600 kilograms per day, assuming the worker maintained consistent output without accounting for fatigue, heat, or the dozen other factors that reduced actual productivity. The bulldozer below was moving material at a rate that defied these calculations completely. The American machine weighed approximately 14.5 tons. Its diesel engine, manufactured in Peoria, Illinois, produced 130 horsepower. The 10-foot steel blade could be raised, lowered, and angled by the operator using hydraulic controls that responded instantly to lever movements. Nakagawa had captured American technical manuals during the initial fighting. He had studied them carefully in his command post, trying to understand the capabilities of equipment his own forces completely lacked. The manual specified that a D8 could move 300 cubic meters of earth per hour under optimal conditions. Nakagawa had initially dismissed this figure as American propaganda, an exaggeration designed to intimidate enemy forces who might capture the documents. Now, watching the machine work, he understood the specifications were accurate, perhaps even conservative. 300 cubic meters per hour translated to approximately 480 tons of material during a standard 8-hour shift. The bulldozer Nakagawa was observing had been working since 700 hours. By his calculation, the single American operator would move more earth by noon than Nakagawa's entire 300-man construction battalion could move in a full day using shovels, picks, and human muscle. The disparity was not 10 to 1 or even 50 to 1. It approached 100 to 1 in raw productivity, and that calculation did not account for the fact that the bulldozer operator would not be exhausted at the end of his shift, would not require the extensive rest periods that manual labor demanded, and could theoretically continue working through multiple shifts if relief operators were available. Nakagawa had spent 7 months transforming Peleliu into a fortress. His engineering battalions, supplemented by Korean laborers and Taiwanese construction workers, had excavated 500 separate defensive positions throughout the island's ridges and valleys. They had dug by hand through limestone that shattered entrenching tools and broke the spirits of men who worked 12-hour shifts in 100-degree heat. They had hauled logs, mixed concrete using hand-cranked equipment, and constructed firing positions that represented thousands of man-hours of brutal physical labor. The work had proceeded slowly, methodically, with results measured in meters per day rather than kilometers. Nakagawa had accepted these limitations because he believed every army faced similar constraints. Construction required time, manpower, and endurance. These were universal factors that applied equally to all belligerents. The bulldozer proved him wrong. The Americans were not operating under the same constraints. They possessed equipment that fundamentally altered the mathematics of military engineering. Nakagawa could see the implications extending far beyond the immediate tactical situation. If American forces could rebuild the Peleliu airfield faster than Japanese artillery could destroy it, then Japanese defensive preparations became meaningless. If American construction battalions could create functional bases faster than Japanese forces could fortify their positions, then the Empire's entire defensive strategy throughout the Pacific was built on false assumptions about the pace of modern warfare. The specific Bulldozer Nakagawa was observing belonged to the 73rd Naval Construction Battalion. The operator was a machinist's mate, first class named Robert Morrison from Bakersfield, California. Morrison was 32 years old and had operated heavy equipment for 7 years before the war on civilian construction projects throughout the San Joaquin Valley. He understood earth-moving with the precision of a man who had spent thousands of hours behind the controls of similar machines. Morrison could judge grade and slope by sight, could estimate material volumes within 5% accuracy, and could maneuver his 14-ton machine through obstacles that would have required extensive preparation for manual labor crews to navigate. Morrison had landed on Peleliu with the first assault wave on September 15th. His bulldozer had come ashore on a specialized landing craft designed specifically to transport heavy construction equipment directly onto contested beaches. Within 3 hours of the initial landing, Morrison was already working, clearing obstacles from the beach to allow follow-on forces to land efficiently. Japanese artillery had targeted his position repeatedly during those first days. Morrison had watched 3 other bulldozer operators killed by enemy fire during the initial week of operations. He had seen machines disabled by direct hits, had operated under conditions where incoming mortar rounds forced him to seek cover every 20 minutes. None of this had stopped the construction work from progressing on schedule. The Seabees, as Naval Construction Battalion personnel were universally known, operated under a dual mandate that distinguished them from traditional military engineering units. They were trained as combat infantry, capable of defending their positions and fighting as riflemen when circumstances required. Simultaneously, they were skilled construction professionals, recruited specifically from civilian trades that provided practical expertise in equipment operation, carpentry, welding, electrical work, and dozens of other specialties essential to building military infrastructure under combat conditions. The average age of CB personnel was 37 years, significantly older than typical infantry formations. Many were men in their 40s and 50s, professionals with decades of construction experience who had enlisted specifically to apply their expertise to military requirements. Morrison represented this hybrid perfectly. Before the war, he had operated bulldozers on highway projects, dam construction sites, and agricultural land development throughout California's Central Valley. He thoroughly understood machine capabilities, maintenance requirements, and the practical limits of earth-moving equipment. When the Navy recruiters had come to Bakersfield in early 1942, seeking experienced equipment operators for the newly formed construction battalions, Morrison had enlisted immediately. He had trained at Camp Hueneme in California, learning combat skills from Marine instructors while simultaneously attending technical schools that refined his already extensive construction knowledge. The productivity Morrison achieved was not merely a function of superior equipment. It resulted from the combination of excellent machinery operated by a highly skilled professional who understood precisely how to maximize output under specific conditions. Morrison knew how to angle his blade for different materials. He understood the optimal approach angles for coral versus volcanic soil versus beach sand. He could estimate fuel consumption rates and plan his work to minimize downtime for refueling. These skills, accumulated over years of civilian construction work, translated directly into military effectiveness that Japanese forces simply could not match. Nakagawa's construction battalions possessed no comparable expertise or equipment. The Imperial Japanese Army had organized construction units called Setsueitai, beginning in November 1941. These units consisted primarily of Korean and Taiwanese laborers, semi-skilled workers, led by Japanese officers and civilian overseers who understood construction principles but lacked the equipment to apply them effectively. The typical Setsueitai battalion numbered between 800 and 1,500 men. They were organized into companies and platoons that worked under military discipline, but their capabilities remained fundamentally limited by their dependence on manual labor methods. Nakagawa had commanded such units throughout his service in Manchuria and later in the Pacific. He had watched Korean laborers excavate foundations using picks and shovels, had supervised teams of Taiwanese workers hauling materials by hand or using simple carts pulled by men rather than machines. The work had been slow, exhausting, and inefficient, but Nakagawa had accepted these limitations as inherent characteristics of military construction. Every army he knew operated under similar constraints. Construction required vast amounts of manual labor because the machinery to accomplish equivalent work simply did not exist in sufficient quantities to fundamentally alter the process. The American approach proved this assumption completely false. The United States had entered the war with extensive civilian construction industries that routinely employed heavy equipment on projects throughout the country. Caterpillar Tractor Company, based in Peoria, Illinois, had manufactured crawler tractors and bulldozers since the 1920s. International Harvester, Alice Chalmers, and other American manufacturers produced similar equipment in quantities that supplied both civilian construction markets and military requirements. When war mobilization began, these companies shifted production priorities toward military contracts while maintaining the basic design principles that had made their equipment successful in civilian applications. Caterpillar alone produced 56,360 crawler tractors across all model types from 1941 through 1945. The company secured over $570 million in war contracts. Production was continuous, expanding and prioritized by the War Production Board as essential to both military construction requirements and broader industrial mobilization efforts. These machines were shipped to every theater where American forces operated. But the Pacific campaigns received particular priority because island-hopping strategy depended fundamentally on the ability to rapidly transform captured islands into functional bases that could support subsequent operations. Japan possessed virtually no comparable production capacity for construction equipment. Japanese industry operated at absolute maximum capacity throughout the war, attempting to replace combat losses in aircraft and naval vessels. Manufacturing priorities emphasized weapons production over all other considerations. Construction equipment received minimal allocation of raw materials, manufacturing capacity, or skilled labor. The few bulldozers and tractors Japan possessed were civilian models, typically requisitioned from plantations or commercial operations, poorly maintained, operating without adequate spare parts or replacement capacity, and frequently breaking down under continuous wartime use. Nakagawa had requested heavy construction equipment repeatedly during Peleliu's fortification phase. His requests had been forwarded through proper channels to 14th Division headquarters, then to 4th Fleet Command in Truk, and eventually to Imperial General Headquarters in Tokyo. The responses had been consistent. No equipment was available for allocation to garrison forces in the Central Pacific. Priority it remained with combat formations and industrial facilities in the home islands. Nakagawa's construction battalions would have to continue working with existing resources, which meant hand tools and manual labor, supplemented by whatever improvised equipment his engineers could fabricate from available materials. The result was predictable. Nakagawa's 300 construction workers, laboring in shifts that covered 20 hours each day to maximize productivity, could move approximately 50 tons of material daily under good conditions. This figure represented the practical limit of human endurance applied to earth-moving tasks. Men could work faster for short periods, but sustained output over days and weeks inevitably settled at levels determined by biological constraints. Human muscle tissue could only generate so much force. Human joints could only endure so much stress. Human metabolism could only process so much energy from available food supplies. These were absolute limits that no amount of discipline or motivation could exceed indefinitely. The bulldozer Morrison was operating would move 500 tons of material during its 8-hour shift. One machine, one operator, achieving 10 times the daily output of Nakagawa's entire construction battalion. The disparity was so extreme that Nakagawa initially struggled to accept his own calculations. He rechecked his mathematics multiple times, wondering if he had made some fundamental error in unit conversion or measurement. The numbers remained unchanged. American construction capabilities exceeded Japanese capabilities by orders of magnitude, not mere percentage differences. Nakagawa understood the strategic implications immediately. The Empire had planned its defensive strategy throughout the Pacific on assumptions about construction timelines that were fundamentally incorrect. Japanese military planners had calculated that American forces would require weeks or months to develop captured islands into functional bases capable of supporting further operations. These calculations were based on Japanese construction experience, where major projects required extended timelines, even when labor was abundant. Japanese doctrine assumed that American forces would face similar constraints, that all armies required roughly comparable timeframes to accomplish equivalent construction tasks. The bulldozers proved these assumptions catastrophically wrong. American forces could capture an island and make it operationally useful within days, not weeks. They could construct airfields, establish supply depots, build roads, and create port facilities at speeds that Japanese planning had never anticipated. This capability fundamentally altered the operational tempo of the entire Pacific campaign. American advances accelerated throughout 1944 precisely because construction capabilities allowed each successful operation to support the next operation much more quickly than Japanese defensive preparations could adapt to the changing situation. Nakagawa had witnessed this pattern repeatedly during the previous year. After Guadalcanal fell, the Americans had developed Henderson Field so rapidly that Japanese commanders had been shocked by the speed with which their former base became a fully operational American airfield launching strikes against Japanese positions throughout the Solomons. After Tarawa's brutal 3-day battle, the captured airfield had been back in operation within 15 hours, a timeline that seemed impossible to Japanese observers who understood how long such repairs required using manual labor methods. After Saipan fell, American aircraft were flying combat missions from captured Japanese airfields within 1 week, a development that had caught Japanese forces in the Marianas completely unprepared for the suddenly shortened timelines they faced. The pattern was consistent across every major American amphibious operation: capture, construct, advance. The cycle repeated with accelerating tempo as American construction capabilities improved through accumulated experience and refined techniques. Japanese defensive doctrine attempted to adapt by creating more elaborate fortifications that would require more time and resources to overcome. But this strategy only delayed American advances rather than preventing them. As long as American forces could rebuild faster than Japanese forces could destroy, the ultimate outcome remained inevitable. Each island lost meant one more base gained for American operations. Each base gained meant shorter supply lines for subsequent American advances. Each advance meant less time for Japanese garrisons to prepare defenses for the next assault. Nakagawa lowered his field glasses and returned to his command post deep within the limestone caves. The tunnels represented 7 months of brutal labor by his construction battalions. His men had excavated through solid rock using hand tools, explosives, and methods that differed little from mining techniques used for centuries. The positions were defensible, interconnected, and had proven their value during the fighting that had already cost American forces far more casualties than their pre-invasion estimates had anticipated. But Nakagawa understood that his elaborate defenses only delayed the inevitable. American forces would eventually reduce every position through systematic application of overwhelming firepower and resources. When the fighting ended, American bulldozers would immediately begin erasing his fortifications, filling his tunnels and transforming Peleliu into another link in the chain of bases that extended across the Pacific toward the Japanese home islands. Inside his command post, Nakagawa composed a report to 14th Division headquarters describing the American construction capabilities he had observed. He documented the bulldozer's productivity with specific measurements and calculations. He noted the strategic implications of equipment that allowed American forces to construct 10 times faster than Japanese forces could destroy. He recommended that Imperial General Headquarters revise their defensive planning to account for American construction speeds that made prolonged campaigns increasingly difficult to sustain. Japanese forces could extract heavy casualties from American assaults, but they could not prevent American forces from ultimately achieving their operational objectives as long as superior construction capabilities allowed the attackers to maintain consistent logistics and reinforcement advantages. The report would eventually reach Tokyo through the military communications network that still functioned despite American submarine interdiction and air attacks. Staff officers at Imperial General Headquarters would read Nakagawa's assessment and file it alongside dozens of similar reports from commanders throughout the Pacific who had witnessed American construction capabilities and understood their strategic implications. Nothing would change. Japan lacked the industrial capacity to produce equivalent equipment, lacked the resources to train comparable numbers of skilled operators, and lacked the logistics networks to distribute such equipment, even if it somehow became available. The empire would continue fighting with the capabilities it possessed, accepting that material disadvantages would compound with each passing month as American industrial production continued expanding while Japanese capabilities deteriorated under sustained attrition. Morrison continued working through the morning heat, his bulldozer's diesel engine maintaining its steady rhythm as the blade carved through coral debris and compacted fill material into smooth, level surfaces. By 1,000 hours, he had completed repairs to the southern section of the airfield runway, a stretch of approximately 400 meters that Japanese artillery had cratered during the pre-landing bombardment. The work had required 3 hours of continuous operation, including 2 brief stops for refueling and a minor adjustment to the blade's hydraulic system. Morrison estimated he had moved approximately 60 tons of material during that period, reshaping terrain that would have required Nakagawa's entire construction battalion 3 days to accomplish using manual methods. The productivity differential extended beyond simple earth-moving to encompass every aspect of military construction. American engineering doctrine emphasized mechanization wherever possible, recognizing that machines could accomplish in hours what manual labor required days or weeks to complete. The Seabees who landed on Peleliu brought with them not only bulldozers, but also graders, scrapers, rollers, cranes, pile drivers, concrete mixers, welding equipment, and portable power generators. Each piece of equipment multiplied the effectiveness of the men operating it, transforming construction from a labor-intensive process dependent on vast numbers of workers into a mechanized operation that prioritized skilled operators over raw manpower. Japanese construction methods remained rooted in approaches that emphasized human effort over mechanical efficiency. Nakagawa's battalions excavated trenches by hand, hauled materials using shoulder poles and simple carts, mixed concrete in small batches using manual methods, and accomplished every task through techniques that had changed little since the 19th century. The Empire's military engineering manuals, which Nakagawa had studied extensively during his training at the Army War College, contained detailed instructions for organizing large labor gangs, calculating how many men were required for specific tasks, and managing workers to extract maximum productivity from available manpower. The manuals assumed that construction fundamentally depended on human muscle applied systematically to well-defined problems. American engineering manuals, by contrast, contained extensive specifications for equipment operation, maintenance schedules, productivity calculations based on machine capabilities rather than human limitations, and troubleshooting guides for mechanical problems that might arise during operations. The contrast reflected fundamentally different approaches to military construction, approaches that emerged from broader differences in industrial development and economic organization between the two nations. America had mechanized its civilian construction industries decades before the war, creating expertise, infrastructure, and manufacturing capacity that translated directly into military capabilities when mobilization began. Japan had industrialized rapidly during the early 20th century, but prioritized heavy industry focused on steel production, shipbuilding, and weapons manufacturing, rather than the diversified industrial base that characterized American economic development. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The consequences of these different development paths became visible throughout the Pacific campaigns. American forces possessed not only superior equipment, but also the logistics networks required to maintain that equipment under combat conditions. Morrison's Bulldozer required regular maintenance, including oil changes, filter replacements, track adjustments, and periodic overhauls that addressed wear on critical components. The 73rd Naval Construction Battalion included specialized mechanics who performed these maintenance tasks using spare parts, tools, and supplies shipped from depots in Hawaii, distributed through an extensive logistics network that reached every forward position where American forces operated. When Morrison's Bulldozer needed a replacement hydraulic hose during the second week of operations on Peleliu, the part arrived within 48 hours from a supply ship anchored offshore, delivered to his position by a logistics team that treated equipment maintenance as a routine operational requirement. Japanese forces lacked equivalent logistics capabilities. When equipment broke down, which happened frequently, with poorly maintained civilian machines operated beyond their design specifications under harsh tropical conditions. Repairs often proved impossible due to lack of spare parts. Nakagawa had witnessed this pattern repeatedly during his service in Manchuria and the South Pacific. A broken excavator would sit idle for weeks while mechanics attempted to fabricate replacement parts from scrap metal. A damaged truck would be cannibalized to keep other vehicles operational. Equipment that required specialized repairs simply remained broken, abandoned in place, gradually deteriorating under exposure to weather and neglect. The American ability to maintain equipment readiness under combat conditions reflected systematic attention to logistics that extended far beyond simple supply delivery. The Navy had established repair facilities, supply depots, and maintenance procedures that treated construction equipment with the same priority given to combat, aircraft, and naval vessels. CB battalions included personnel specifically trained in heavy equipment maintenance, men who had worked as mechanics in civilian life and brought professional expertise to military requirements. The combination of excellent equipment, skilled operators, and robust logistics support created construction capabilities that exceeded Japanese capabilities by margins that fundamentally altered the strategic balance throughout the Pacific. Morrison completed his assigned section of runway repairs by 1100 hours and moved his Bulldozer to a new work site where the 73rd Battalion was constructing supply dumps to support the ongoing infantry operations in the Umurbrogol Mountains. The work required clearing jungle vegetation, leveling terrain, and creating access roads that connected beach landing points to forward storage areas. Morrison worked methodically, following a site plan prepared by the battalion's engineering officer, clearing approximately 1 hectare of jungle during the afternoon shift. The vegetation, which included trees with trunks exceeding 1 meter in diameter and dense undergrowth that would have required days of manual labor to clear using axes and saws, disappeared before Morrison's bulldozer blade within hours. Nakagawa observed this work from his command post using field glasses to track American construction progress throughout the island. He maintained detailed logs documenting American capabilities, recording timelines for specific projects, noting equipment types and their apparent productivity rates. The data accumulated into a comprehensive picture of American construction methods that confirmed his initial assessments. American forces operated at speeds that made Japanese defensive preparations obsolete before they could be completed. The war had become a race between Japanese attempts to fortify positions and American capacity to overcome those fortifications through superior resources and construction speed. Japanese forces were consistently losing that race because they lacked the equipment and logistics to compete effectively. The broader pattern extended across the entire Pacific theater. In the Gilbert Islands, American forces had transformed Tarawa from a contested battlefield into a functional forward base within 2 weeks of the island's capture. In the Marshalls, Kwajalein and Eniwetok had undergone similar transformations, with airfields, port facilities, and supply depots appearing within days of American forces securing the islands. In the Marianas, Saipan and Tinian had been systematically developed into massive base complexes that hosted B-29 bomber operations against targets throughout the Japanese home islands. Each transformation had occurred at speeds that Japanese planning documents had never anticipated, speeds made possible by construction equipment that fundamentally altered the calculus of Pacific warfare. Japanese strategic planning had assumed that island defenses could impose sufficient delays on American advances to allow time for reinforcement, counterattack preparation, and gradual attrition of American will to continue the war. These assumptions required that American construction timelines follow patterns similar to Japanese experience, where major projects measured in months rather than weeks. When American bulldozers, graders, and other construction equipment proved capable of accomplishing in days what Japanese manual labor required months to complete, the entire strategic framework collapsed. American forces could advance much more rapidly than Japanese defensive preparations could adapt, creating a widening gap between American offensive capabilities and Japanese defensive responses. Nakagawa understood that his defense of Peleliu represented one attempt to find tactical solutions to this strategic problem by constructing elaborate cave systems and tunnel networks that maximized defensive advantages while minimizing exposure to American firepower. Japanese forces could impose higher casualty rates on attacking forces and extend the duration of campaigns beyond American pre-invasion estimates. The strategy had achieved partial success. American casualties on Peleliu had exceeded predictions by substantial margins, and the campaign had required more than 2 months rather than the 3 days originally estimated. But ultimate American victory had never been in doubt. Japanese defenders could delay American advances and extract heavy costs, but they could not prevent American forces from achieving their operational objectives as long as superior logistics and construction capabilities allowed sustained operations. The afternoon of November 2nd passed with Morrison continuing his construction work, while Nakagawa observed from his increasingly isolated command post. American infantry had systematically reduced Japanese defensive positions throughout the southern and central portions of the island, compressing the remaining defenders into the northern ridges where Nakagawa's headquarters was located. The construction work proceeded simultaneously with combat operations, demonstrating the American capacity to build even while fighting. CB bulldozers worked within artillery range of Japanese positions, clearing roads, preparing supply dumps, and constructing facilities that would remain useful long after the fighting ended. By late afternoon, Morrison had moved approximately 120 tons of material during his 8-hour shift, completing tasks that would have required Nakagawa's 300-man construction battalion 2.5 days of continuous labor. The productivity ratio Morrison represented was not exceptional by American standards. Similar work proceeded throughout the Pacific, wherever American forces operated. Thousands of CB bulldozer operators accomplished comparable results daily, systematically transforming captured islands into the network of bases that supported American advances toward the Japanese home islands. Japanese observers throughout the Pacific had witnessed similar demonstrations of American construction capabilities. On Guadalcanal, Commander Tadashi Nakajima had watched American Seabees repair Henderson Field faster than Japanese bombers could damage it, leading to his assessment that American logistics capabilities represented an insurmountable advantage. On Saipan, Colonel Takeshi Takashina had documented American construction speeds that allowed operational airfields to appear within days of the island's capture. On Guam, multiple Japanese officers had reported observing construction on a scale that exceeded anything in their experience, with American forces creating what appeared to be entire cities of military infrastructure within weeks. These reports accumulated at Imperial General Headquarters throughout 1944 and into 1945, creating comprehensive documentation of American construction capabilities and their strategic implications. Staff officers analyzed the data, prepared assessments, and briefed senior commanders on the magnitude of the material disadvantage facing Japanese forces. The conclusions were consistent and unavoidable. Japan could not match American construction speeds with available resources and capabilities. The empire would continue fighting with diminishing capacity to contest American advances as the material imbalance widened with each passing month. Some Japanese planners proposed attempting to acquire or manufacture equivalent construction equipment, recognizing that closing the productivity gap represented a strategic necessity if Japan hoped to sustain effective defense of remaining territories. These proposals founded on practical impossibilities. Japan's industrial capacity remained fully committed to maintaining combat aircraft production, naval vessel construction, and weapons manufacturing needed to replace mounting losses. Diverting resources to construction equipment production would require reducing output in these other critical areas, creating immediate operational problems that outweighed potential long-term benefits from improved construction capabilities. Even if Japan somehow manufactured significant numbers of bulldozers and other construction equipment, transporting such heavy machinery to isolated Pacific garrisons would prove logistically impossible. American submarines had systematically devastated Japanese merchant shipping throughout 1944, sinking vessels faster than Japanese shipyards could replace them. Supply lines to forward bases had deteriorated severely, with many garrisons receiving only sporadic resupply by submarine or fast destroyer runs that carried minimal cargo. Moving multi-ton bulldozers through this environment would require shipping space that Japanese logistics networks could not provide, even for higher priority cargo, such as ammunition, food, and medical supplies. The strategic impasse was complete. Japan needed construction capabilities comparable to American standards to contest Pacific campaigns effectively, but lacked the industrial capacity to produce such equipment, lacked the logistics to distribute it if produced, and lacked the trained operators to employ it effectively, even if both production and distribution somehow became possible. Japanese forces would continue fighting with capabilities determined by manual labor limitations, accepting that this fundamental disadvantage would compound with each successive American operation. Nakagawa drafted his final assessment of the Peleliu campaign during the evening of November 2nd, working by candlelight in his command post as American artillery continued targeting the remaining Japanese positions. He documented the American construction capabilities he had observed in precise detail, noting specific equipment types, productivity rates, and the strategic implications of capabilities that exceeded Japanese standards by orders of magnitude. His report acknowledged that Japanese tactical innovations, particularly the defense-in-depth strategy that had characterized Peleliu's resistance, could impose higher casualties on American forces and extend campaign durations beyond initial estimates. But he concluded that tactical successes could not compensate for fundamental strategic disadvantages in industrial capacity and logistics that allowed American forces to sustain operations indefinitely, while Japanese capabilities deteriorated progressively. The report contained specific recommendations for Imperial General Headquarters to consider when planning future defensive operations. Nakagawa emphasized that Japanese forces should avoid attempting to match American construction speeds or logistics capabilities, recognizing these as unwinnable competitions given available resources. Instead, defensive strategies should focus on maximizing American casualties per operation, extending campaign durations, to strain American logistics and potentially affect American political will to continue the war. This approach accepted that ultimate tactical defeat was likely, but might achieve strategic effects if cumulative American casualties reached levels that influenced domestic support for continued Pacific operations. These recommendations reflected broader Japanese strategic thinking during the final year of the war. Unable to contest American material advantages directly, Japanese planners increasingly emphasized inflicting maximum casualties through defensive tactics designed to make each American victory as expensive as possible. The strategy led to battles like Iwo Jima and Okinawa, where Japanese forces fought almost exclusively from fortified positions, extracting heavy American casualties while accepting their own annihilation. The approach represented acknowledgement that Japan could not win the Pacific War through conventional military means, but might potentially achieve political outcomes through attrition if American casualties became unsustainable politically, even when victories continued militarily. Morrison departed Peleliu on November 8th aboard a transport ship carrying the 73rd Naval Construction Battalion to their next assignment. His Bulldozer remained on the island, transferred to another CB battalion that would continue construction work throughout the following months. During his 3 weeks on Peleliu, Morrison had operated his Bulldozer for approximately 140 hours, moving an estimated 3,000 tons of material, completing runway repairs, constructing supply dumps, building roads, and performing the routine construction work that transformed contested islands into operational American bases. His contribution, while significant at the tactical level, represented merely one small component of the vast American construction effort that proceeded throughout the Pacific Theater. Nakagawa remained in his command post until November 24th, when the minor organized Japanese resistance on Peleliu ended. His last radio transmission to 14th Division headquarters acknowledged that his position had become untenable and that further resistance would serve no operational purpose. The message concluded with observations about American construction capabilities and their strategic implications, repeating assessments Nakagawa had emphasized throughout his final weeks on the island. American forces could build faster than Japanese forces could destroy, could supply forward positions more effectively than Japanese defenders could sustain themselves, and could maintain operational tempo that Japanese logistics and construction capabilities could not match. These fundamental disparities determined campaign outcomes, regardless of tactical innovations or defensive determination. The broader lessons of Peleliu's construction disparity influenced American military planning throughout the remainder of the war and into subsequent conflicts. The demonstrated value of mechanized construction capabilities led to continued emphasis on heavy equipment procurement, operator training, and logistics support for engineering operations. The Seabees, who had proven their worth repeatedly throughout Pacific campaigns, became a permanent component of naval organization, maintaining construction capabilities that supported American military operations globally during the decades following World War II. Japanese post-war analyses examined the construction disparity as one factor among many that had contributed to defeat in the Pacific War. Former officers who had witnessed American construction capabilities acknowledged that Japan's inability to match American construction speeds had created strategic disadvantages that tactical innovations could not overcome. The consensus among post-war Japanese military historians emphasized that material factors, including construction equipment and logistics capabilities, had proven decisive in determining campaign outcomes throughout the Pacific Theater. Morrison returned to civilian life in 1946, resuming his career as a heavy equipment operator in California's Central Valley. He worked on dam construction projects, highway building, and agricultural development throughout the post-war decades, applying skills refined during military service to civilian requirements. His wartime experiences operating bulldozers under combat conditions on Pacific Islands became stories he occasionally shared with younger operators, emphasizing the importance of understanding equipment capabilities, maintaining machines properly, and approaching construction work with professional discipline regardless of circumstances. Nakagawa did not survive the war. Official records list him among the approximately 10,000 Japanese personnel killed defending Peleliu during the campaign that extended from September 15th through November 27th, 1944. His reports documenting American construction capabilities survived in captured Japanese archives and were analyzed by American intelligence officers during the post-war occupation period. These documents provided valuable insights into Japanese perceptions of American military capabilities and confirmed that Japanese commanders had accurately understood the magnitude of their material disadvantages even while continuing to resist. The specific morning when Nakagawa had observed Morrison's bulldozer moving 40 tons of material in 90 minutes represented a microcosm of the broader Pacific War's decisive factors. American industrial capacity, translated into construction equipment operated by skilled professionals, created capabilities that Japanese forces could not match using available resources and methods. The productivity ratio, one American bulldozer accomplishing the work of 300 Japanese laborers, exemplified material disparities that determined strategic outcomes across every dimension of the conflict. Modern military forces continue employing mechanized construction capabilities that trace their conceptual origins to World War II innovations, proven effective throughout Pacific campaigns. Contemporary engineering units operate equipment far more sophisticated than Morrison's D8 bulldozer, featuring computerized controls, GPS guidance systems, and power outputs that exceed wartime machines by substantial margins. But the fundamental principles remain unchanged. Mechanized equipment operated by trained professionals accomplishes construction tasks at speeds impossible to achieve through manual labor methods, creating strategic advantages that influence campaign outcomes independently of tactical factors. The bulldozers that operated throughout Pacific Islands during World War II demonstrated that modern warfare depends fundamentally on industrial capacity and logistics capabilities rather than exclusively on combat prowess or tactical brilliance. Victory consistently goes to nations capable of producing superior equipment, transporting it where operationally needed, maintaining it effectively under difficult conditions, and replacing losses more rapidly than opponents can inflict damage. These principles, proven decisively through Pacific War construction operations, remain valid in contemporary military planning and operations. Nakagawa's realization on November 2nd, 1944, watching Morrison's bulldozer accomplish in hours what his entire construction battalion required days to complete, represented recognition of a fundamental truth about industrial-age warfare. Material advantages determine outcomes when disparities reach levels that tactical innovations cannot overcome. Japanese forces fought courageously, developed innovative defensive tactics, and extracted heavy casualties from American assaults throughout the Pacific campaigns. But courage and innovation proved insufficient to offset overwhelming American advantages in construction equipment, logistics capabilities, and industrial capacity that allowed sustained operations at tempo Japanese forces could not match. The morning observation session that had begun with Nakagawa watching a single bulldozer work on Peleliu's airfield had revealed strategic realities that extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. American construction capabilities represented not merely superior equipment, but systematic advantages in industrial development, logistics planning, operator training, and maintenance support that created compound effects throughout extended campaigns. Japanese forces could delay American advances and impose significant costs, but could not prevent ultimate American victory as long as material disparities remained so extreme that one American machine accomplished the work of 300 Japanese laborers. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.